Alright, welcome back to Project Dodge Raider, episode 3. I've been working out here the last couple of days, mainly on the engine, and what we ended up working on was the pistons and the crank and some balance shaft bearings. Now the pistons, I bought a new set of pistons and rings using the old rods. One rod I had to replace because a bearing gave loose and started knocking and it tore up that rod. So we bought another rod. I used just an old school method of pulling the pins out, the wrist pins. I am replacing the piston and the rings. I'm going to reuse the rod and I got new pins. So the way that I'm doing this is kind of the old school redneck way of pulling these apart. Just a grade 8 bolt, a socket big enough to have the pin go inside of it, and then I just heat this up a little bit with my propane torch and then just unscrew it and it pulls that pin out. Save the 30-40 bucks to have the machine shop do it. And then we use a little bit of propane to heat up the old rods, and then you can just slide the new wrist pins in. You got about 3, 4, 5 seconds before those rods cool down and they'll grab that pin. Our new pistons for the 2.6 Mitsubishi motor, and they have an arrow pointing towards the front of the engine, and you'll want to match that up with the printed numbers on the side of your rod. Numbers face the same direction as your arrow. There you have it, slides right in. Give that a second to cool off and it'll grab that pin. Here we have the finished product. I have a rod that I have pressed onto this piston, this brand new piston head, and we do that by heating up the end of the rod until it turns a straw color, golden brown, and then we would just slide it right in, and when it cools it grabs that pin and it's stuck on there. Once I got the pistons put together, I gapped the rings. I got a new set of rings, and you just put the rings into the cylinder bores about as low as they're going to travel, and you check your book for how many thousandths of the gap is supposed to be, and they all checked out. Put the rings onto the pistons, and then I worked on the balance shaft. There's 2 balance shafts in this motor. They spin to counteract vibrations from a 4-cylinder. So we have the balance shaft here. There's 2 of these in the engine. They spin. They got lopsided weights on them, and they counteract the balance vibrations of the motor. So we resurfaced this surface here, and that's the bearing we're replacing. We're also replacing this bearing. We'll resurface that with a little bit of 600 grit sandpaper, and then we'll insert the new bearing into this. Put it all back together, and now it's chain driven, and it spins that. And I couldn't find my cam bearing puller, so I went down to the hardware store and bought some washers, a few nuts, some all thread, and created a bearing puller. Alright, so today we're working on these balance shaft bearings. You can see one bearing right in here. We're going to replace this bearing right there. The balance shafts are a couple of spinning shafts that have a weight on one side of them, and they counterbalance, they counteract the vibrations caused by an inline 4. they spin in the opposite direction at twice the speed, and somehow they counterbalance the vibrations. So I'm gonna pull these bearings out here. I don't have a cam bearing puller, so I just made one. Went down to the hardware store and put together out of a couple of washers, a couple of bolts, and a round thing there. Put some tape around it. We're gonna put that in there, put some all thread into it, and then we're gonna just pull it straight out that way. Right, like this. There you go. You just crank it, put some pressure on that bearing, and it slides right out. And did the same process to put the new bearings back in. Then lastly tonight I put the crank in, new bearings for the cranks. I have plastic gauge, but I haven't used it yet. I may check a couple of the surfaces, but it's from the reputable machinist downtown, and it's a ground 10 under with new bearings, so it shouldn't be a problem. So we wrap that up tonight, and then by Monday I'll have the head put back on, pistons in, and we'll get to putting the intake on and wrapping this up with the timing chain set out front. So this motor will be wrapped up probably by Monday, then we can move on to the interior, and lastly some suspension parts, wheels and tires and brakes, and then we'll get this sucker on the road here within a couple weeks. Anyway, check back with episode 4, and we'll keep cruising with this.